A Boeing 737 is plummeting toward a tabletop runway carved into the top of a hill. The altimeter is screaming. The ground proximity alarm won't stop. The first officer has begged the captain to pull up, twice. The runway ends at a 250-foot cliff, and they are going way too fast to stop. If this captain does not act in the next 8 seconds, 166 people are going off that edge. What happens next will shock you. Hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming. It's past 10 o'clock at Dubai International Airport. Ground crews move through the warm night air loading bags, topping off fuel tanks, running through checklists. Inside the terminal, passengers bound for the coastal Indian city of Mangalore shuffle toward their gate. The aircraft waiting for them, a Boeing 737-800, less than 3 years old, gleams under the floodlights. Up in the flight deck, 2 pilots settle into their seats. The captain is Zlatko Gluščić, a 55-year-old Serbian national. He has flown into Mangalore's challenging airport 16 times. The first officer, Harbinder Ahluwalia, a 40-year-old Mumbai native, has made this approach 66 times. Between them, this route should be routine. But tonight, something is already wrong. And neither of them knows it yet. Here's the plan for tonight's operation. Depart Mangalore at 9:35 p.m. Land Dubai at 1 a.m., turn the aircraft around, take off again at 2:45 a.m., and touch back down in Mangalore by 6:30 in the morning. A tight loop. No relief crew. The same 2 pilots the whole way. The captain is not supposed to be on this flight. He had been on holiday in Serbia, a time zone 3.5 hours behind the Gulf, and only returned 2 days earlier. His body clock is still anchored somewhere over Central Europe. When Air India Express called the day before and asked him to cover for a colleague, he agreed. In 2010, the airline still handled pilot scheduling manually, with paper rosters, and last-minute swaps like this were common practice. But common doesn't mean safe. At Mangalore, Air India Express had no medical officer on staff. Indian aviation regulations required pre-flight health checks for all flight crew, but the language was vague enough that different airlines interpreted it differently. Here, pilots were simply asked to self-declare their fitness. No examination, no objective measure, just a signature. The captain signs, the first officer signs. The aircraft departs Mangalore on time. The outbound leg to Dubai passes without incident. The crew then has just over an hour on the ground in Dubai before the return flight. No medical check is required there either. The assumption is that the crew was already cleared at origin. Tonight, that assumption is wrong. Before we go any further, you need to understand where this plane is headed. Mangalore International Airport sits on the crest of a hill, what aviation calls a tabletop airport. The runway is surrounded on all sides by steep, dramatic drops. To the east, the Kudramukh Hills push up into the sky. At the far end of runway 24, the ground simply disappears. A sheer 250-foot cliff face plunging into a ravine below. The runway itself is narrower than standard, 150 meters across versus the conventional 300. The overrun area at the end, the buffer zone where a plane can coast if braking doesn't work, is overgrown and poorly maintained. There is almost no margin. Because of all of this, Air India Express had officially designated Mangalore a critical airport. The rule: only the captain may land here. The first officer's role is strictly to monitor. That designation will matter enormously tonight. And one more thing. The Mangalore Area Control Radar is down. Normally, controllers can watch aircraft on screen, track their descent, and sequence them smoothly onto approach. Without radar, they fall back on a manual separation system, keeping aircraft farther apart and managing altitude changes conservatively. This affects when Flight 812 will be cleared to descend, and that delay will start a chain reaction. About an hour after departure from Dubai, something happens in the cockpit of Flight 812. The captain falls asleep. Not a brief doze. He slumps back in his seat, breathing heavily, and the sound of snoring fills the flight deck. His body, still locked in Serbian time, has simply given out. The first officer is now alone at the controls. He is managing both the radio, all communications with air traffic control, and the actual flying of the aircraft. A job designed for two is now being done by one through the darkest hours of the night on approach to one of India's most demanding airports. The circadian window, that physiological low between 2 and 6 in the morning when human alertness bottoms out, is fully upon them. At 5:33 a.m., the aircraft reaches waypoint AMA. A TC instructs the crew to prepare for an SDME arc approach into runway 24. You might be wondering what that means. A standard instrument approach, called an ILS, brings a plane in along a perfectly straight line, aligned with the runway center line, descending on a gentle electronic slope down to the threshold. Clean, precise, well understood. But Mangalore can't use a straight-in approach from the east. The Kudramukh Hills are directly in the way, so instead, the aircraft must fly a curved path, an arc at a fixed distance from the airport's navigation beacon, sweeping around until it can intercept the runway alignment at the correct angle. This is the DME arc approach. It demands more active management from the crew, constant cross-checking, precise altitude discipline, careful timing. Pilots train for it, but it requires attention, sustained, coordinated attention, which is in short supply right now. About 130 miles out, the first officer requests descent clearance. A TC denies it. Without radar, controllers are using separation buffers roughly twice the normal distance, and the system isn't ready for them yet. The clearance finally comes at 80 miles, later than the crew anticipated. This is the first domino. Under normal procedure, an approach briefing is conducted at 150 miles. The crew walks through the arrival plate, the missed approach procedure, the go-around plan. That briefing window has already passed. The captain is still asleep. The first officer nudges him awake. The captain stirs, groggy, disoriented, still fighting his own biology. He takes in the situation. They are closer to the airport than they should be, higher than they should be, with a mandatory approach checklist that hasn't been started. There is no time for a proper briefing. They skip it. The captain deploys the speed brakes to try to drag speed and altitude down faster. At 25 miles out, the aircraft is at 18,000 feet. They should be much lower. ATC clears them to 2,900 feet, but they have a long, long way to fall in very little distance. The first officer requests a shorter routing, a tighter arc path. A TC approves. But this makes no sense. They are already too high. A longer arc would have given them more distance to descend. Shortening the path makes the geometry harder, not easier. By the time they reach the entry point of the 10-mile arc, they should be at 2,900 feet. They are at 10,500. The captain drops the landing gear. He pushes the speed brakes full open. The plane sheds altitude fast, but not fast enough. At the point where they need to make the right turn onto final approach, they should be at 2,200 feet. They arrive at 6,000. Then, something strange happens. 2 minutes later, the glide slope indicator on the captain's instrument panel, turns pink. The aircraft appears to have captured the descent path to the runway. The autopilot latches on and begins guiding the plane downward. But this is not the correct glide slope. At Mangalore, the ILS transmitter projects two signal lobes. The intended one sits at 3 degrees, a gentle standard descent. The second, phantom lobe, sits at 9 degrees, nearly 3 times as steep. Because the aircraft arrived so far above the proper path, it flew directly through the false signal. And the crew, fatigued behind the aircraft, relieved to finally have guidance, accepted it without question. They are now pointed at the runway at 9 degrees. They are diving. The steep angle is accelerating the aircraft. At 10 miles out, the captain calls for flaps 10. The first officer hesitates. They are moving far too fast for that setting. "Are you sure, Captain?" "Yes." Flaps 10 is set. At 7.5 miles, they should be at 2,000 feet. They are at 5,000. At 4 miles, they should be at 1,500 feet. They are at 3,200. At 3 miles, flaps 40 is selected. The before-landing checklist, which was supposed to have been completed much earlier, is hurried through. They should be at 1,200 feet. They are at 2,800. The descent rate has climbed from a standard 1,000 feet per minute to over 2,000. The first officer's voice tightens. "We're too high, Captain. The runway is straight down." No response. The captain keeps flying. At 2 miles, the captain disconnects the autopilot and takes over manually. Everything about this approach is wrong. The speed, the altitude, the angle, the checklist. Every stabilized approach criterion has been violated. The only correct action is a go-around. Climb away, enter a holding pattern, reset, try again. At 1.5 miles, the captain finally recognizes it. Wrong glide path. He says it out loud. The cockpit erupts. Sink rate, pull up. Sink rate, pull up. The automated warning system chants it over and over. The ground proximity alarm fires. The captain doesn't pull up. He stares at the runway lights growing in the windscreen and keeps pushing forward. This is plan continuation bias, the psychological trap where a pilot becomes so committed to the outcome they've fixated on that they cannot process the evidence telling them to stop. "Captain, go around. We are not stable." The first officer says it one more time. The captain overrides him, and because Air India Express rules prohibit the first officer from taking control at Mangalore, the first officer cannot act. At 1 mile out, the runway is visible. The plane is still too high, too fast. The captain pushes the nose further down, trading altitude for forward speed. The descent rate now screaming past 4,000 feet per minute. In the tower, a controller senses something is off. Express 812, confirm established. The captain instructs the first officer to respond. Affirmative. The tower clears them to land. The threshold flashes beneath the wheels at 200 feet. Airspeed 160 knots, 16 knots above the target. The plane floats, carried by its own momentum, past the touchdown zone. The right main gear finally bites the runway at 4,500 feet from the threshold. The aircraft bounces. It resettles at 5,200 feet. More than half the runway is behind them. They have 2,800 feet left. The auto brakes are set to level 2. They should be on maximum. The captain throws the engines into reverse thrust. The brakes bite. But the cliff edge is rushing toward them, and physics is unforgiving. Then, in the final seconds, the captain makes one last decision. He releases the brakes. He pushes the throttles forward. He is going to try to fly off. The engines spool up, but jet engines don't respond instantly. There is a lag of fractions of a second. Seconds they do not have. The attempt to accelerate kills what little stopping force remained. The aircraft barrels into the overrun. Right wing tearing through an ILS antenna, smashes through the perimeter fence, and runs out of runway. The Boeing 737 leaves the edge of the cliff. Gravity takes it immediately. The aircraft drops into the ravine below, striking the gorge floor with catastrophic force. Fuel tanks split open. Fire erupts. The fuselage breaks into 3 sections. Debris fans out across the hillside. Emergency services scramble, but the terrain is remote and brutal. Before professional responders can reach the site, local villagers arrive. With no equipment and no training, they climb into the wreckage and pull people out. Their actions save minutes that matter. Out of 166 people on board, 8 survived. In the weeks that followed, investigators reviewed the flight data recorder, listened to the cockpit voice recordings, and reconstructed the final approach second by second. Their finding was devastating in its simplicity. If the captain had held full reverse thrust and kept maximum braking applied, if he had not attempted that last-second go-around, the aircraft would have stopped within the overrun area. The final, fatal decision. Throttles forward, brakes released. Right when they were needed most. A plane is in the air. A deafening bang comes from the cargo hold. Smoke begins seeping into the cockpit. Instruments start failing one by one. The captain declares an emergency. But what investigators uncover next goes far beyond mechanical failure. Decades of classified documents, conflicting government reports, and questions that have never been fully answered. That story is coming next. Subscribe. You won't want to miss it.